Welcome to Art Toronto. My name is Mia Nielsen. I'm the director of the show, and I am thrilled to welcome you to our platform talk, The Evolving Role of Public Art and Placemaking. This is presented by ArtworxTO, Toronto's Year of Public Art, and the City of Toronto. Today we have Rebecca Carbin moderating. She's principal of ART PUBLIC UnLtd. We are thrilled to welcome artist Ken Lum, Coralie Olson, she's the managing partner in Toronto at MASSIVart, and Ying Strang, director of the New Gallery.
Hello, my name is Rebecca Carbin. I'm founder and principal at ART PUBLIC UnLtd. I'm an independent curator and art consultant specializing in work in the public realm. And I'm here today in my capacity as strategy and programs lead for ArtworxTO, Toronto's Year of Public Art 2021. This is a program that's designed to embolden and enable the city's artists and arts organizations to explore the unique role that art plays in the urban landscape. It is my distinct pleasure to moderate a conversation with our panel today on the evolving role of public art and placemaking in the contemporary urban landscape. Much of what we call public art, while formally shaped by parallel art historical trajectories of modernism, conceptualism, post-conceptualism, etc., still comes from the historic trajectory of the monument. And as we witness a reckoning with our predilection as a species for monumentalizing specific moments and individuals, we see an unprecedented public interest in the significance of the overall practice of employing art to weave an official and purportedly collective narrative of place into the fabric of our built urban environment. And now in the autumn of 2020, as we reflect on what can certainly be considered one of the most bizarre years of collective history, we are holding a virtual conversation about the role of public art and placemaking for a virtual international art fair. Public art, more than almost any of its arts discipline cousins, is relatively resilient to the era we are now in and for the foreseeable future. It is scalable, it is amenable to social distancing or physical distancing. And so I'm really pleased to be able to share this conversation today, looking back, looking forward and sideways, and focusing on a moment in a continued evolution of the landscape within which artists and artworks play a pivotal role in turning non-spaces into places. I'd like to thank Mia and Rachel at Art Toronto for their interest and support in the possibilities of art in public and for partnering with ArtworxTO in pulling this panel together. It's been a pleasure to work with them, and our conversations leading up to this have been inspiring in their generosity and collaborative spirit, which extends to and is moreover guided by an interest in what their or our audience is interested in and delivering compelling and engaging program for you, the listener and watcher. It is now my pleasure to introduce our panelists. Ying Strang is an artist and cultural worker based in McKinsey's Calgary, as a guest on the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta. Originally hailing from the southern United States, Strang relocated to Canada in 2006 to pursue her education at the Alberta College of Art and Design, now AU Arts. In addition to Strang's studio practice, she's been involved in the not-for-profit arts sector since 2010. Strang is currently the director of the New Gallery, president of the Alberta Association of Artist-Run Centres, and a governor on the board of Glenbow Museum. Strang's work in the arts is informed by an artist-centered and community-driven ethos, prioritizing strong stewardship of artistic practices and accessibility to programming for audiences. Strang's core focus for this work over the last several years has been the context of the New Gallery's location in Calgary, Chinatown, which has included redefining the organization's role in being a good neighbor and active participant in the community. And Strang will be speaking with us today about the New Gallery's oversight of the Chinatown Artist Residence Program in Calgary. Coralie Olson is the managing partner of MASSIVart Toronto, an award-winning global art consultancy and production agency. MASSIVart collaborates with emerging and established artists, designers, and creative talent to create art-driven experiences such as architectural design, commissioned works of art, and cultural programs with the mission of making art more accessible. Coralie's strategic thinking and previous business development experience makes her a valuable asset in fostering relationships with clients in Canada and expanding our reach globally. Not our reach, MASSIVart's reach globally. Coralie will speak with us today about the recent project MASSIVart created in Montreal's Quartier du Spectacle. And it is my pleasure to introduce our final speaker, Ken Lum. Ken Lum is an artist born and raised in Vancouver and currently based in Philadelphia. His work has been exhibited at Documenta 11, the Venice Biennale, Shanghai Biennale, Carnegie International, Whitney Biennial, and the Vancouver Art Gallery. He's produced public artworks in cities from Rotterdam to Burnaby, including his monument for East Vancouver on Clark Avenue in Vancouver. Lum was recently awarded the Governor General's Award in Visual and Media Arts, the Gershon Iskowitz Prize in 2020, and was appointed an Officer of the Order of Canada in 2017. He is co-founder of Monument Lab, which has recently been awarded a Mellon Foundation grant for their outstanding work in the field of monuments, and is the Marilyn Jordan Taylor Penn Professor at the Weitzman School of Design at the University of Pennsylvania. Ken is also an excellent writer, and his recent book, Everything is Relevant, has been the literary touchstone of my own 2020, a book I've enjoyed picking up at various points over this weird time, which has brought comfort to know that there are people like Ken out there thinking across time and space, and reaffirming my belief that it is artists who will ultimately help us make sense of all of this, as they always have. And Ken will be sharing with us the story of Melly Shum hating her job, and how this work of his, originally commissioned as a temporary installation, went on to become the new name for Wit de Wit, the new namesake as they kind of grapple with their own colonialist history. So I would like to turn the mic over now to Ying Strang to talk about the Chinatown Residency.
Hello, and thank you for that introduction and the opportunity to be in conversation with you all today. It's an honor and privilege to be able to share and to learn with you all. As Rebecca said, I'm joining from Okinstis, Calgary, and I'd like to express my gratitude for living on this land. I'd also like to take a moment with this platform to send my love, respect, and courage to the Indigenous land and water protectors from coast to coast, in particular, the Mi'kmaq, who have been recently under attack for exercising their inherent fishing rights. The violence that has been taking place is, of course, wholly unacceptable, and beyond that, it's integral that we must honor and prioritize these inherent rights. So please show up for our Indigenous communities. So as you know, I've been asked to share a slide, I'll share a slide, but I've been asked to share a project that I'm working on at the New Gallery in collaboration with the City of Calgary Public Art Program. Typically, I'd like to give folks an in-depth overview of the New Gallery's programming and outline our evolving role in the community of Calgary Chinatown before jumping into a particular project. But for the sake of our limited time together today, I'll just very briefly summarize and provide an overview of that work before heading into this particular project. So the New Gallery relocated to the historic Canton Block in Calgary Chinatown in 2013 after our then home, Art Central, was slated for demolition. For those of you unfamiliar with the history of Calgary Chinatown, this present day Calgary Chinatown is actually the third location, which was established around 1910, with Chinese settlers arriving in Mohkinstsis, Calgary, and the first Chinatown being established in 1885. The New Gallery realized that upon moving to this community, organizational changes would be needed for this relocation to not only be successful, but also to be a good neighbor and to be accountable and responsible to the community at large. A major part of this was determining how the organization might be accessible to the local community and a place where they felt welcomed. Initial outreach attempts started with translating signage and later on exhibition texts, as you see here, and publications. And after doing this work for a year or so, we realized that making this information accessible was not enough if community members did not even know about these resources or even felt comfortable visiting our space in the first place. We then began extending focused invitations to partner organizations such as the Calgary Chinese Elderly Citizens Association and the Calgary Chinese Community Service Association to bring groups of their members and residents to the New Gallery for translated tours, workshops, and conversations about our programming. Throughout this time, the New Gallery also began participating in projects led by others in the community, including street festivals, development awareness campaigns, and community cleanups. It was important that the New Gallery didn't just make our work accessible to the community and stop there. We also needed to show up for Calgary Chinatown and prioritize listening, learning, and offering support whenever possible. Over the last 2 years, we've expanded this work to include developing programming collaboratively. This aspect has been the next evolution of what our relationship building in Calgary Chinatown must look like. It's not just about making our programming accessible, and it's not just about showing up for other community organizations' work. It's about bridging our work, and it's about finding those commonalities to deliver something that is representative of everyone involved. We've developed a few of these projects so far, working with partners such as I Love YYC Chinatown and the Calgary Chinese Cultural Center. That brings me to the Calgary Chinatown Artist Residency, which is in collaboration with the City of Calgary Public Art Program. This project has been in the works over the past 2 years after Public Art was approached by the city's culture department about an opportunity to engage artists during the cultural planning process for Calgary Chinatown. In 2016, for a bit of context, a 3-tower development was proposed for an empty parking lot in a neighborhood which asked for the relaxing of restrictions to double the current building height restriction of 15 stories, as outlined in the community's 30-plus-year-old area redevelopment plan. The project was not heavily advertised and the community was not adequately consulted. Once folks became aware and word spread, the community came together, organizing to push back against the approval of this project's ask, which could have been damaging, of course, to the community's future. In the years that followed, the community said we need future development and redevelopment to be done in consultation with us. Eventually, thanks to the community's advocacy, the relaxation of building height restrictions was successfully appealed, and the developer has since pulled the project. The event was, in part, a catalyst for the community coming together to work with the city to determine a path forward for Calgary Chinatown. As Chinatowns all over North America change in their use, in their populations and demographics, their businesses, and their built environments, they're at risk at disappearing if long-term visioning and planning of these communities does not take place. The city is committed to undertaking a project called Tomorrow's Chinatown, which includes developing a cultural plan alongside a new local area plan in consultation with the community of Calgary Chinatown. These documents will define a collective vision for the community and identify planning priorities prior to any future developments, major developments in the neighborhood taking place. To return to the residency, this project is an opportunity for artists to research and develop work in relation to Calgary Chinatown over a 3-month period. A peer jury selected Teresa Tam from Calgary, Annie Wong from Toronto, and Cheryl Wingzi Wong from New York City. All 3 artists have different but equally strong community engagement aspects to their practices, which is a core focus of this residency, and each of them also have interest in Chinatowns within their own communities and artistic practices historically, although of course Calgary Chinatown is unique in its makeup, challenges, and opportunities. There are 3 main objectives of this residency: to engage in the community, to focus their artistic research on the past, present, and potential futures of Calgary Chinatown, and finally, to develop a new body of work that responds to that research. This residency is a standalone project, but runs parallel to the city's Tomorrow Chinatown project, which is being held by the Culture Department and the Planning Departments. One particularly compelling opportunity I see within this residency is the potential for these artists to be advocates for and conduits of additional insights gained from their ongoing outreach in the community. This may help highlight information that's not captured through the city's typical engagement and consultation methodologies. By using an artist-centered lens while expanding the ways in which community engagement takes place, the residency may be able to support a stronger outcome for Calgary Chinatown's new cultural plan and local area plan. In advance of the residency, the 3 artists participated in a programming week of activities and conversations by way of introduction to the neighborhood and began to familiarize themselves with the historical and current socio-political context of Calgary Chinatown. We undertook 30 programs over the course of 5 days. This programming aimed to include a broad intersection of different voices to highlight the many different simultaneous truths and histories that Calgary Chinatown holds. We've had presentations from academics and city staff on heritage, history, planning, and culture. We had conversations over many meals at some of the wonderful restaurants in the neighborhood, joined by community members of past and present. We learned stone shop carving with Stephen Kwok. We had discussions with small business owners and learned about their histories, ideas, and aspirations. And we visited many of the tongs and associations with I Love YYC Chinatown. We made and ate so many dumplings with community elders, and we toured the cultural center and learned its important history and grounding role in the community and preventing the erosion of Calgary Chinatown with their president, Tony Wong. We listened to the Cantonese opera rehearsals at our next door neighbors, the Calgary Harmony of Arts Association, and so many more activities. It was a really intense but fun and interesting week. Of course, as we began stage 2, the actual residency where the artists returned to live and work in Calgary Chinatown, COVID-19 hit, and we have postponed till 2021. Our artists currently have the opportunity to take on long distance research or project development while we wait for it to become safe to resume the project. We're looking forward to sharing more once the residency resumes, so please keep an eye out on the New Gallery social media and website. And finally, I'd like to express all my gratitude to Janet Lavoie and Randy Neeson and the rest of the team at the New Gallery who've collaboratively shaped and built this program, as well as I Love YYC Chinatown for not only participating in the program week, but also sharing their knowledge and collaborating on developing and piloting components of the program week through a recent collaboration. And finally, Watershed Plus for inspiring the program week with their Dynamic Environment Lab Week. And of course, a big thank you to each of you as well for your willingness to be in conversation. I look forward to learning more about your work today.
Thank you so much, Soo Ying. That's a really wonderful project. I'm really glad to be able to give it some profile and tell people on this international platform about it. It's an amazing example of, as you say, artists being a conduit and sort of bringing some of their creativity to bear on some of these really kind of meaty city building issues that sometimes need that completely new way of thinking, a different way of thinking that artists can bring into the conversation. We're going to shift now to Coralie Olson, who's going to talk to us about the project recently completed at the Quartier du Spectacle in Montreal, and Love in the Time of COVID.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Rebecca, and thank you for the opportunity. I'm looking forward to talking about actually a couple of two projects on public art and one on placemaking with the city of Montreal that were really about the recovery and rebuilding initiatives during COVID. Okay, so the first project that I'm going to talk about is called The Essentials with the artist Laurence Philomene. And so this was an initiative by the city of Montreal, specifically to support the artistic and creative community of Montreal, which is so rich and so much a part of the culture of Montreal. And so they developed this initiative to support 50 different projects in the city. And each project had to meet the following criteria. There had to be diversity, technology, and arts. And really what they were looking for was the synergy between different artists and different creative organizations to really, shed light on what was happening during the pandemic and to inspire the community in the different neighborhoods around Montreal. And so we partnered with photographer Laurence Philomene, and really worked with Laurence on this concept of really displaying the diversity of the essential workers in the neighborhood that they live in. And so they wanted it to be very local and to really look at what is an essential worker and to mitigate any fear that we have around our neighbors in the context of the COVID pandemic. And really this idea of what does make an essential worker. And so we worked with Laurence to develop both a physical and an online component to this piece. And so our team worked to design 8 sculptures that were representing the different essential workers that Laurence photographed. And because we wanted to really celebrate the diversity in the neighborhood, each sculpture was a different color. It was really bright and colorful. When you approach the sculptures, all of the sculptures had QR codes, which we know are making a resurgence during COVID-19. And when you scan your phone, you were able to be taken to the online component of the art piece. Alternatively, if you were to discover this piece by Laurence online, there's a website where they featured different essential workers within the community. And also there were interviews and bios. So really just getting the different perspectives of the different workers in the community. And this launched on September 25th and is up until November 2nd. So if you're in Montreal and you get a chance to check it out, or you can visit the website online. And the second program that I'm going to talk about is more of a cultural programming and placemaking with the Quartier du Spectacle. And really the idea here was the Quartier du Spectacle was to create these destinations in different neighborhoods around Montreal. And so there was visual art, there was performance art. And the idea was really to, have these different installations that were set up in the different neighborhoods to really, drive, people, but in a safe way, so that it's not a festival and we're driving a lot of people at once. But the idea was to support the local businesses in the neighborhoods. And from a creative perspective, we wanted to, bring some happiness and some joy to the citizens in the summer after, there was the city was shut down for so many months. And so really the idea was, what does happiness evoke? And we had 9 different art installations in different neighborhoods. And really it was about just accessibility and colorful and just, bringing joy and happiness, and also different aspects of placemaking. And so they could be both enjoyed in a more passive way if you were walking by, but then they could be interacted with, or they provided seating. And so I'm just going to show a few examples of the different placo de arts that were around the neighborhood. So the first one is Los Trompos, and really the idea here is that it's sort of reminiscent of like a child's top toy. And so again, really colorful, really accessible. And the second piece was with the artist Jose Luis Torres, who's a really well-known contemporary artist who does a lot of public art commissions and works in museums. And so this was really a departure for him, but it was meant, again, just to be very accessible and colorful. And really, this is a picture of, these are real people interacting with it. So it was really just meant for people to use it however they wanted to. And there was seating around this piece as well. And the next piece, the bag, was, beside the river. And so it was reminiscent of the river of the waves, but also there was seating. So again, this idea that it was multi-dimensional in terms of, passing by, but functional as well. And Ça va bien aller with Judith Poirier, and apologies for my really terrible French, everyone, was this idea of just bringing a little bit of color into the park. And it was it was mimicking the colors of the Palais de Congrès around it. And so really it was just, again, this idea of bringing some happiness and inspiration to the different neighborhoods. Voila, thank you so much.
Thank you, Coralie. That's really nice to find out more about those projects. I actually happened to stumble upon the colorful spinning pieces while I was with my family in Montreal and supporting local businesses, and we had a nice time interacting with them. It's also really nice to see, there's a kind of nice counterpoint to the work that Ying was talking about as well, that's really dealing with this kind of like meaty issues, and then something that's just really about using art to enjoy the space that you're in and kind of bring some levity to what has been a difficult time, certainly for a lot of people. And it can, perform many roles in between as well. So I'd like to shift now over to Ken Lum, our final speaker, who's going to talk about Melishum, and another, really one of my kind of favorite stories coming up recently in this discussion around the role that art and artists and artworks can play in creating a sense of place.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, for the occasion to speak about the developments around my 1989 work, Melishum Hates Her Job. It's a delightful story. It's a highly improbable story. And it's actually a very affirming story in terms of the potential of public art to, when it's allowed to kind of operate democratically, that is, it becomes owned by the public on its own terms, which this work has. And for me, it's also satisfying because I write a lot about public space. I write a lot about public art, and so it's fantastic that this happened to me, and I feel very lucky because not too many artists who work in the public realm this happens to. I made a work called Melly Chum Hates Her Job, which was a image text piece, which I guess I'm known for as, making. And it was included in a retrospective I had at the then named Wit de Wit Center for Contemporary Art in Rotterdam in Holland. Wit de Wit is a colonial officer who worked for the Dutch East India Company. And he was also involved in slave trading. It was a company was involved in it, and he had some decision-making regarding that. So obviously a problematic name. But at the time, the location of the brand new museum was in a very undeveloped part of Rotterdam. In fact, it was an area that many businesses would say it was a little bit sketchy even, and so on. And so they named it simply after the street, right? The Wit de Wit is located on Wit de Wit Straat or Wit de Wit Street. And so that name just went carried on for many, many years. And then in 1990, my retrospective was the inaugural exhibition for the brand new museum. And the museum had the idea to repurpose an old billboard frame, which is attached to the side of the museum. And they would use it to advertise the exhibition that was ongoing inside, to draw in people who would see the poster of announcing the show, and then attracting visitors into the museum. And so they said, well, we'd like to use Melly Chum Hates Her Job as one of the images. We'll put in the dates, we'll put in your name, and so on. And for whatever reasons, I said, what if we just exhibited the work without any other context, no attribution of name, no dates of the exhibition, and so on. And so they wanted to think it over, and the next day they came back and said, sure, let's do it, right? The whole idea was that billboard of Melly Chum Hates Her Job would only last the duration of the exhibition, which was about 10 to 11 weeks. So at the end of 3 months, it would be taken down, which is precisely what happened. And so I was back in Vancouver, Canada, where I was living then. And a few weeks after the closure of the exhibition, I received a phone call from the Wit de Wit. And the person speaking to me was a former curator there, and he was all giddy. And I knew something was interesting was going on by the tone of his voice. And he said that we've received a lot of phone calls and letters and some faxes from local Rotterdammers demanding that Melly Chum Hates Her Job be reinstalled, right? I said, why is that? And they said, well, a lot of people really like it, and so on. And I thought, wow, that's fantastic. And then the curator added the proviso. Yes, one person said that every city deserves a monument to people who hate their jobs, right? And I was just over the moon when I heard that. And so I said, of course I can consent to this, right? And so it's been what was supposed to be a billboard that announced my show, and only up for under 3 months, has been up since 1990 continuously. In that time, it has had huge Facebook following. It's become on all the tourist maps. You can, as places to go to, and there'll be a little asterisk that says, "Here is Melly Chum." People take their pictures next to Melly Chum, lots of selfies, lots of Flickr pages, and so on. And none of this was anticipated by me, and I don't take any credit for it. I think it's just that it tapped into something rare, whereby people really identified with the content of the work, and they embraced it. At that point, I also knew that once that happened, I no longer effectively owned the work. It was actually owned by the Rotterdammers, owned by the people. Yeah, so during that whole period, there were many moments whereby newspapers would actually ask me to comment about Melly Chum Hates Her Job. And in the Süddeutsche Zeitung, which is one of the largest newspapers in Germany, asked me to do a project page for them on Melly Shum Hates Her Job. And so I came up with a double page on a weekend edition, where one side says Melly Shum hates her job, and the other side I redid the graphics, and it says Melly Shum still hates her job. And then in 2010, the government of Holland opened its pavilion as part of the Shanghai 2010 World Exposition. And they had the idea to basically have the entire facade, more than 2.5 stories high, image of Melly Shum hates her job. So you actually walk into the pavilion and the entire front wall is Melly Shum hates her job. And that generated more dialogue, more, even more controversy because of, in China, you had Foxconn and a lot of these kind of massive factories where people really are dying working at their jobs and so on. And so very recently, there's a couple of years ago, there's an initiative started to rectify the problematic name of Officer Wit de Wit, which, by the way, ironically, in English stands for whiter than white, which is one of those weird things. And so they came up with several names. One was Haven, because it's supposed to be a haven for art, and another was Cat, C-A-T or K-A-T in Dutch, Kunst, something, art and theory, and art, and such, and or Kunst, aesthetics in theory. And but nobody really liked the name. And then I've received a second phone call, and they said, "Is it okay if we name it after Melly Shum?" And so the name of the new name for the Wit de Wit, former Wit de Wit Center for Contemporary Art, will be known as the Kunstinstituut Melly, or the Art Institute Melly. So it's a kind of fantastic story. I'm glad to be able to tell it.
It actually gives me goosebumps. It's such a good story. And thank you so much for telling it to us in detail. It's really, I hope that a lot of people get to hear that story this way. And I'd like to, I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask the panel, and I know that we have to be sort of succinct, but so there's a tension in public art between its kind of disruptive role and its sort of agenda to create a bit of an interruption so that it's noticed. And it's like it's kind of its way of interrupting the norm of a place is kind of part of what an integral part of what public art does. But then it also at some point along the spectrum comes to define a place, and the story that you've just told us, Ken, is an exemplar example of that. Can it be both of these at once? And so, because somewhere along the line, the lifetime of a public artwork, it shifts from disruption to norm. And I wonder if any of you want to speak first about this kind of shift from the interruption to the regular program and what that kind of means regarding the placemaking role of art. Anybody?
I mean, I think it does that all the time. I think I think the one factor about public art, which is very difficult for public artists to work in, is that people expect, they give an initial reading. The jury public art give an initial reading, and what they should also do is think about the duration, the kind of temporal question in terms of the life of a work, because very often a work of art is embraced over time. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure that, when my Melly Shum Hates Her Job was first up, not intended as a work of art, but as a publicity for the exhibition, people maybe found it curious and so on. But then over time, and especially when it came down after almost 3 months, something happened. They missed it, right? And that's not baked into the public art process when in thinking about public art. I can also think of Maya Lin's Vietnam Veterans Memorial. It does both, right? Many people didn't like it at first, and now people embrace it. And in that case, the dissonance is still there, even as people embrace it.
So Ying, do you see any parallel between this and sort of thinking about the role that the artist played in that sort of navigating a difficult community and development project, and whether there's a point at which it becomes something that's almost expected or looked forward to?
Yeah, well, I agree with the time aspect, absolutely. I think that folks are often hesitant or find change difficult. I think thinking a little bit about the kinds of conversations and development pressures that Calgary Chinatown has been facing, you know, the change is happening, and folks acknowledge that. And it's difficult, but if that work can kind of be done thoughtfully and in conversation with the people it actually impacts, that's where I see the opportunity. This idea of a work in public becoming another character of our everyday lives, a work being able to be a reflection of the communities who are walking by it every day, is something I think is a really exciting kind of role that public art can take on. We grow accustomed to being in dialogue with that work every day, as with Melly, walking by and thinking about it in kind of your transit to work, your commute to work, your lunch break, you know, going outside to walk your dog. That work is in conversation with your everyday life. And so that kind of time that's given, it becomes just another character in your life. And I think that that's a pretty interesting aspect of it. And the other thing is, in terms of this idea of like the initial reading of work, we're able, there's those images, they'll show you an image and you'll see something the first look, you'll see something else the second time around, and you'll see something else the third time around. And these works have every ability to continually shift and change their meaning as the collective conscious and folks who are observing that work have the opportunity to engage with it and think about how it explicitly works out within their own lives.
So I think that's a really interesting piece to pick up on. And I wonder how do you think art programs, public art programs, can address this desire for longevity that exists within an ever-shifting landscape and population, and you know, there isn't sort of a permanent site in terms of context within an urban environment, and yet there are lots of programs that are we seem to have as humans a proclivity towards trying to make things permanent, and as you say, people don't like change. So I mean, Ken, you've put Monument Lab has done some really interesting work about how we think about permanence and within the public art landscape, and how to kind of grapple with that right now.
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of tropes associated with public art, right? And in addition to that, that's something which Su Ying has mentioned, people become habituated to it, right? So it could even be a problematic monument, but people may still miss it, not because it's the content, but because they miss it just because they're so familiar with it being in the landscape, just on that level, right? And so I think it's important to at this time to speak about all the other stories that aren't being told, that has not been told, has been in fact suppressed in the context of the inventory of landscape that dots many cities, right? Naming of public schools, all these sorts of things is a way of, I really object to the term cancel culture, because I really think this is a means to really open up space, open up the dialogue, open up public space, and open up democratic space. Mm-hmm. And that provides much more opportunity for public artists to work in as well.
And public art can be kind of an ideal platform for having some of those difficult conversations as well. Shifting gears a little bit, as we're recording this conversation to be part of Art Toronto's first online fair, we'd be remiss to kind of have this conversation without talking about the impacts of the past few months on how we use and behave in public space. So I'm going to ask Coralie Olson You know, as I mentioned in my opening comments, art in public is very scalable, and by its nature, it's amenable to physical distancing. In this context, do we focus our energy on driving people back into the public realm with art as a catalytic force, or do we lean into the online world as a public space and explore those possibilities for art to become an agent for dialogue across geographies and traditional notions of place, which Ken is kind of referring to in his previous comment? What do you think there? Like, what do we do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, you know, I think it's a little bit of both and combining them. And I think the opportunity that, you know, has come up in the last few months is maybe shed light on the fact that we were ignoring or not paying enough attention to some innovation from an online or technological perspective. But, you know, as humans, we're social by nature. And I think, you know, more than ever, we're craving these social interactions and these, you know, these experiences. And so people want to go and have these physical experiences. But I think it's this idea of combining them so that maybe there is a physical component to it, but there's also a digital or online component, to your point, to help make it more accessible and to, you know, communicate that to more people.
Sue or Ken, do either of you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I'd love to. I absolutely agree. I think the future holds a combination of both. On one hand, I believe that institutions have an absolute responsibility to ensure the kind of ongoing accessibility. We know that there's many communities that might not be able to kind of access some of our other spaces, public spaces, in an ongoing way, and we need to be able to offer that as an option. At the same time, I think that it's really important to consider the work and the artist and what their preference is, and if their work is best served by going digital or in person, and really being able to start having conversations and building kind of relationships and support systems for those kinds of early conversations when you're commissioning a new work, to be really involved with the artist and select a method and platform that best serves, and then use that kind of hybrid delivery model in a way that makes sense. And I guess the last piece of that is really, how do we not leave audiences behind? Digital literacy and some of the ways artists might envision their work coming to be online might be kind of complicated to navigate or explore unless you have strong digital literacy. So what is our role as artists and institutions to help support and ensure that access is continual?
Well, I took your question more in the direction of, you know, public space at this point. And I don't want people going to parks if it puts them at risk of COVID-19, right? But at the same time, I look at my, you know, I'm lucky. I have a nice big backyard, I have a nice big front yard, and I have the privilege of not having to go to look out for public space, because my kids can run around in the yard and so on. And whereas, you know, other kids are, you know, in South Philly, North Philly, they're kind of stuck in their homes. And so I think at this time, as an artist, we have to start working with cities to try to open up more public space for when this pandemic is over. I think we should also demand of our city governments right now that to be more creative, more imaginative in terms of what spaces can be opened up. They should be closing off streets, for example, more and more streets, and allowing and turning them into temporary parks, at least until the pandemic is over. I think there's lots of ideas. You know, there's a huge prep school near us, and because it's the prep school, it's got these fields and so on, and they won't allow anyone to access the fields, right? They allowed people to access the fields before the pandemic, but now with the pandemic, no one can access the fields. And I'm talking about like 200 acres of fields, right? So I think, you know, there's another area where maybe the city should demand of that prep school that some fields should be open at certain hours for the public and so on. So that's the sort of thing we should be doing at this point until the risk of COVID-19 abates.
So on the one hand, we have art kind of being a catalyst for that safe re-entry and kind of kickstarting of social life again. And Coralie's project in Montreal is a good example of that. And on the other hand, if we do the digital online, we have art leading a kind of global conversation about some of the really important issues. So it's a win-win, really. I agree with you all, we should kind of do both. I have one last question. It may get edited out because of time, but we'll see if we can squeeze it in, because I think it would be a nice note to end on. Administrators of public art programs like to talk about public art as a necessary part of a vibrant cityscape. It's something that's said all the time, and it's, you know, if you kind of decipher it, you try and decipher it, you're not sure really what's packed into that sentence. But I'd like to ask each of you, what makes a vibrant public art program?
I can go first, I guess. I mean, I think it starts with, you know, really diversity. So if you think about, if you want to appeal to the entire population, you have to, you know, have a diversity of not only the voices and the curators and the artists, but, you know, the different mediums as well, so that, you know, there's this mix of both different voices, but how the art is being translated in the city.
I think you have to have some reasonable degree of buy-in from a wide section of the public, and that means you know, and that doesn't mean ceding the judgment of public art to the public, but it does mean that there has to be some prep work regarding the dialogue, the exchange that you in developing a real relationship of interest in the public, which is basically your audience. And too often, you know, members of the public, for all the wrong reasons, feel alienated from public art, right? It's not because they can't read it or because they just naturally resist. It's because they've never been given the tools to be able to understand public art. Right, and so that's partly an educational program. That's part, and so on. So, I think if you have that, you've already are more than halfway to having a successful public art program.
Yeah, I would echo that kind of deep engagement in and knowledge of communities, both past and present, is imperative for the administrators to have that knowledge and to understand that history of where the program or where the public art takes place. Also, thinking about, you know, these programs are so often embedded in our cities and in bureaucracy and incredibly risk-averse institutions. And how do we, I think about the kinds of vulnerability and just responsiveness needed from institutions today. And how can we have our programs, which are nestled within these cities and bureaucracies, clearly state and hold their values and apply that to the art that they're programming, as well as take the kind of openness that we see with the wit in acknowledging those histories, acknowledging change, and responding to that change as time goes by.
Amazing. I think that those were some really amazing comments from each of you, very different about sort of the diversity of a program and on kind of many different fronts, the bringing people into the conversation, making a program that resonates beyond just a small audience, and thinking about the ways that artists work in that kind of responsibility to both the arts community and the public are really interesting things to think about in putting together or ensuring kind of the continued success of a public art program. So without any further ado, we're going to wrap up. Thank you, Ken Lum. Thank you, Ying Strang. So thank you, Coralie Olson, for joining me this evening in this conversation about the evolving role of public art and placemaking. And thank you, Art Toronto, for hosting us today.